All of those folks over to the right, move your conversations out. We're going to start right now. We've got the incredible moderator, who's a counselor to the mayor in a lot of ways, helping to map out the future of this city from a connective perspective. This young man has also been a tremendous support of Silicon Harlem from the very beginning. This young man has been at our side. So it's a proud honor of us, Bruce and I, to have our longtime friend, a real visionary, and I tell you, if there's nothing else, this man is a serious New Yorker. He gets it, and he wants to make sure that the people of New York is essentially the best large city in this country. The great Joshua Breitbart.
Well, it's always, being called a New Yorker is about the nicest introduction I think anybody could get, which is hopefully not to say to be unwelcome to all our guests. And in fact, it's always also nice to be very welcome as a Brooklyn kid here in Harlem. And thank you to Bruce and Clayton and all of the people who are working to make this event possible. We're talking about, in the spirit of Rethink Everything, the focus of this panel is Rethink Internet. And that is, it's just a great joy for me to be able to moderate this panel. And I'll just give you a little brief introduction of the folks here. You can read more about their bios on the conference website and program. But so much of what we're doing here in New York requires gathering expert views of what the future is going to hold. The city has set a goal that we'll have universal, affordable, reliable broadband for all New Yorkers everywhere they go in the city by 2025. And among the challenges of that ambitious statement is what will the internet look like in 2025? So it's such a great opportunity with this room, with all of you, with this esteemed panel, to get those expert insights to help understand where we are today and where we're going. So that's really about the city's aspirations for that inclusive vision of the internet that will work for all New Yorkers. And what you have here, in keeping with this theme of Rethink Internet, really are 4 people who are doing that, who are rethinking the internet, all in different ways. They're working in the space of community organizing, marketing and brand strategy, policy and research, and infrastructure delivery. So it reminds me of when we're doing community organizing with an organization called People's Production House here, and we used to start out by having everybody draw a picture of the internet, of their experience of the internet, and everybody's picture would be very different, and you realize that there is no expert in the whole internet because there's so many levels to it. It's policy, it's infrastructure, it's the service, it's the content, it's the experience and the relationships that go into that, that it is not something that any one person can hold all the knowledge and expertise on. And so it really requires events like this to come together and have that discussion. So we're joined by somebody that everybody here knows, Bruce Lincoln, co-founder of Silicon Harlem. Anna Rua, who you'll have to remember, but in addition to her extensive background work at the state level on a program that made sure that the entire state had broadband connectivity, and hopefully she'll speak from that experience. She's also the public affairs manager for Crown Castle, which is it's not a household name, it's an office hold name for somebody who works in city government, like myself, but may well be the most important internet company that you never see as a customer, as a consumer. I don't know if that's accurate. Sheila Foster, who's a professor of law and public policy at Georgetown University, formerly at Fordham here in New York, and leading thinker and researcher in the intersection of climate change and the commons with internet access and digital inclusion, and Daniel Calderon, brand strategist and film producer, again understanding how influencers work on the internet and how you can get your message out. So just to start, we're going to start in with some questions. There'll certainly be time for audience to weigh in, and hopefully some light will flash at me, or somebody will wave their hands wildly to let me know as we're running in that direction of time. Or if I check my phone, it's for that purpose. So I just really would love to have everybody weigh in to say, how do you see the internet changing between now and 2025? And what are you doing to bring about that change? Bruce, maybe you would kick us off as a host?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And let me frame this, in this manner. I want everyone to think about that what we're starting to look at is the next generation internet is the community internet. And I think, in our description of this panel, we talk about this idea of the internet in the palm of your hand. Well, the internet is being moved much closer to you physically than has ever existed before. And so that creates an unprecedented opportunity to really think of it, not from the standpoint of sort of how it's been built by the incumbents, but how it can be built on behalf of the community as it meets the needs that we've expressed. And some of those groundbreaking applications Marie Scylla Dixon alluded to, but we're at an inflection point where we actually can start to shape the internet so that it really starts to meet our needs on the hyperlocal level. And I'll talk more about that as we move on with our talk.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it, Bruce, and to my co-panelists. This is so fun to be here. My name is Anna Rua, and I am the Public Affairs Manager for Crown Castle. But before, Josh had alluded to the internet and talked about my work at the state level. So I worked on Governor Cuomo's $500 million initiative to bring high-speed internet to the most rural and remote regions of the state. And so, New York State, if you think about it, really has 62 counties, where I've traveled to 56 of them. And that urban and rural divide was really bridged through that program, where now we can say that 99% of New York will have access to high-speed internet at speeds that the FCC has set as broadband, which is 25.3, and in the vast majority of those areas, it's going to be 100 megabits. So transitioning over to the to the private sector, I now work for a company that nobody's heard of, and Crown Castle's portfolio is really the reason why every single person's cell phone in this room works. We are the largest shared wireless infrastructure builder in the country. We're 60 billion Fortune 500, and we have a portfolio of cell towers, of small cells, which is why the internet is getting closer, lower and closer to wherever you are, in the right of way. And then we also have fiber optic, which is the foundation of everything that's going to happen in 5G. None of this happens, none of 5G or 6G that we were talking about, Josh, it won't happen without fiber optic, and we have 60,000 route miles of that peppered throughout 48 states and in Puerto Rico, and the vast majority of that fiber is concentrated in the Northeast and in New York City. So that's how we're contributing to the next generation of internet technology.
So, hi, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Always a fan of these conferences and of Silicon Harlem, who's really pushing us all forward to think in new ways about what the coming 5G and world of internet looks like, in particular for communities and households and populations that have not had access to the highest speed internet up to now, in a world in which we need the internet to look for a job, for kids to do homework. So when we say when we ask what does the world look like by 2025 with these new technologies, I think we have to ask a couple questions, and this is part of my work and part of a pilot project that I'm working on with Clay and Bruce in Harlem. And one is who controls what happens with the technology, and towards what end is technology being used for, right? So on the first question is a question that I would frame as a question of governance. So one of the things we're working on is a community-based edge cloud internet application in Harlem right now. Because even though New York City is a smart city and arguably the smartest city in the world, still, you know, up to 30% of New York City households in communities of color and low-income communities don't have broadband access, don't have high-speed access. So, so we can be a smart city, but still struggle to get those services and those technologies in the hands of people. And when we do, you know, what happens with the data? What happens in terms of how we think about the applications? Who decides those questions? So that's one of the things that I work on, and can talk more about that. Secondly is, to what end are these technologies put? We talk about the Internet of Things, which is to say that everything in our house, everything that we deal with will be connected. And toward what purpose, I think, is a question we have to ask. And so those are the kind of questions I work on, and I'll just leave it there for now. And those are the crucial questions I think we have to ask as we go forward.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Calderon, and I'm a brand strategist, and I'm probably the least techie person on the panel, but I deal with like real people and how to communicate simply to them so they can understand how to buy certain things or buy into different ideas. And what the internet is going to look like to me, and what I'm interested in, is I think we think about the Internet of Things from like a Black Mirror perspective. Everyone is like nervous and scared and saying, you know, the world is going to come to an end and the internet is a scary thing. So I think I'm most interested in is like, how do you really simplify everything that we're working on and the programs that you're working on for people to truly understand that this is where technology is going, and that, you know, it's really important to educate our communities on what's important, how can they be involved, and how can they be part of the development of the Internet of Things in the future. Because we talk about 5G, we talk about the Internet of Things, but there's nothing specific, right? We're still developing what that really looks like. But so how do we teach people that, you know, it's okay, and that the things that they're worried about and scared about, you know, it's actually going to be more helpful to the community.
Young kids growing up.
It's so interesting because each of you is speaking to a very different level of relationships. Is it, you know, me and my one-on-one personal relationships? Is it a Harlem thing? Is it a New York City thing? Is it a global internet thing? And I think, you know, the next generation of the internet is going to be influenced at all those levels, and going to need governance at all those levels. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you see working against that vision that you have for the future of the internet? And I don't know, Dan, you want to start and go back in the other direction?
Yeah, I think it's the education piece, and I think it's making sure that we debunk what people understand about like the internet and what people understand about social media. How do we use social media and the internet and, you know, all that connectivity for good, and make sure it doesn't affect things like mental health, which is it's definitely affecting those kind of things. Yeah, I think that's kind of like what we need to like really worry about.
So, yeah, could you just say a little bit more about when you say mental health, what are some of the, just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so because everyone is connected, there's like a certain ideal of how people, say for example, like a 10-year-old girl needs to look. The filters, just the different things that we push out there to get people engaged in the internet. But that's not all that social media can be for. So I think in terms of governance and like who's in charge of pushing this out, I think if we have what would the world look like if we have programs in our public school systems that teaches people about the internet, and it does not just come from Facebook, it just doesn't come from IG, right? That they could actually use this for social impact causes and just different programs like that. So so I think we think about it that we're not the smart people, like black kids in Harlem or black kids in Brooklyn is getting fed information, and they could actually be involved in creating what that looks like. So from a mental health perspective, because we're so connected and we don't really have that in real life connectivity outside of digital, I think we need to really figure out how do we teach it better so that people understand how to use it more appropriately.
So one big challenge that I'll throw out there right now is the challenge of inequality, right? So we live in a world that's increasingly unequal and stratified. And every public good we can think of, whether it's housing, whether it's environmental goods like parks, whether it's transportation access, is unequally distributed. And so when New York City says that we're going to make internet accessible and affordable to everyone, I think that is a huge challenge, right? And so just think about public schools, okay, or the school system in New York City. A few months ago at Silicon Harlem, we had the pleasure of hearing from a number of educators from very different schools across New York City. And it was extraordinary to hear that some of them, from the minute the children come into school, they have a laptop in their hand, they have the best applications, they're doing their work at a technological level that will prepare them for the future. And it spans the spectrum. At the least advantaged schools, maybe one classroom has laptops and they have to share them around other classrooms. Many of the kids don't have laptops at home. They don't have high-speed internet access at home. So what does it look like to say, or what does it mean to say that we're going to extend this new public good, which is now as important as transportation, housing, and green space, to all New Yorkers? It's a huge challenge. And I'd like to hear more about how the city plans to do it.
Well, just to jump in for a
Yeah.
second, I agree it's a huge challenge. That's why we're excited to hear the perspectives of everybody on it. But in some ways, it's even more challenging than schools, because for schools, we have a long history of that as a public good, a long history of seeing that as something that needs to be equitably distributed. In the case of internet service, it's something that only recently has become an essential service for all. And we have to now look back at decades of uneven investment from the private sector. How do we now, in partnership with the private sector, understand those disparities and seek to make those corrections with policy tools that maybe haven't been invented yet? So I have no illusions that this is an easy undertaking, and the only thing we can't do is set our sights too low, because I don't think that will really do justice to the challenge. So Anna, do you want, I don't know if you wanted to continue on that or talk about other challenges that you see facing your vision.
So I really see the challenges, and I'm going to talk about it from an industry perspective, right? The challenge for the industry is really a developed workforce that has the capacity to deploy and build and has the skill set necessary for that next generation technology, right? So it's really, there is a workforce, there's a gap in, we have more jobs available than we can fill. On average, we're having delays in industry that really are putting a pretty severe, it's a pain point, because we're trying to get these networks deployed to meet the current demand. And it really is a workforce development thing. So that ties into education, that ties into, developing a skill set from an early age. So it has some really heady policy issues and implications. And really, you hit the nail on the head, which is, industry and the public sector need to work hand in glove, because the same kids that are graduating are going to be, the leaders of tomorrow, and we need to develop them so that they're able to be, the best.
And I know Bruce has direct experience to speak to that, but just to clarify, and how much of what you're talking about is work that happens sitting in front of a computer, and how much of it is work that happens, out in the city, physically building what this infrastructure looks like, putting radios on things, running wires, because those can actually be very different skills, and we need all that to make this work. So, could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, we need all of that, right? And what percentage, I don't know, but let's talk about how a network is built. A network is built with RF engineers, right? Understanding that on the corner of 125th and 3rd, there is network degradation because there's dropped calls. And so, so it's that data gathering. The engineer then goes and designs and does the analysis, produces a document. Then we have, the design team that then designs the networks that's going to be able to provide the service that's necessary at that particular pinpoint, and then you have, the men and the women that go out there and actually physically build the networks, that micro trench and dig the streets, deploy the fiber, connect it to the pole, so there's different levels and iterations, and we need all of it.
It's so interesting because, okay, now 2025, we build this 5G system and everything is connected, right? But then our education system hasn't changed that much, right? So what does that do for anything, So I don't know. I'm not a political guy at all, but it just seems pretty simple to me, that you create the world and you create talent, because I used to work for Amazon, and we literally spent millions of dollars on relocation, right, to get the talent in order to fill the jobs, because the company was growing rapidly, right? So it's pretty simple. Yeah.
Bruce, you wanna?
So that's a good point. I'm going to give a shout out to my friend and colleague Andres Enriquez. We go back to the Center for Children Technology, where in the 80s, we were talking about children learning with computers, and we talked about this thing called the internet, and people were like, man, you guys are crazy. What are you talking about? Now, and earlier, Gail Brewer was here, who actually has been a proponent in pushing these types of forms of digital learning and infrastructure into the schools. So the education system has changed in some respects, but from the standpoint of it as a system, it's inertial in some respects. But as we're moving forward, what we're trying to do now, Danny, to your point, is make sure that rather than it simply being how we're engineering the internet, now we're talking about how we're engineering for equity. So that means we think about, based on what we've learned, we now know it's not good for kids to totally learn from tablets. They also need to relate to books. So we've now spent some time learning from that. We have to look at it from a historical perspective, such as what Ellie said, where we look at this from the standpoint of we're at another inflection point where there's going to be this level of economic dislocation, but then where will the jobs come that will replace the jobs that will be lost? And why is this quite different from when folks came back from the war and there were jobs that you could do because in factories you basically used physical labor? Well, now we've gone through the first part of the information age where it was mental labor, and now in the age of automation, some of those jobs that required mental labor will be replaced by AI and machine learning. So we're at a profound point where that's why these have to be community-based conversations. So that surfaces the role of the sort of co-city method that Sheila's talking about, where we make sure we're talking to elders, we're talking to folks from the community board. They're not necessarily techie, We have to hear what they have to say. We've got our good friend here, Ryder Foley, who is doing a lot of work in Harlem. Clayton alluded to how we did 2,000 surveys over the summer. Well, that was spearheaded through a team led by Ryder Foley. We're doing what's called participatory technology assessment. We have to get out into the community on 125th Street as getting surveys, getting people using technology as you see these young people showing over here from Columbia. It's that type of design and deployment that we're now looking at, and it includes, we have Khaled Keynes, he's one of our digital stewards. He's from East Harlem, he's from Youth Action, Youth Build, Training Construction. Well, he's now building wireless networks. So it's all those things that are now happening on a community scale and happening here in Harlem. And the idea now is to make sure everybody knows about it so that we all can balance how we're thinking about this and really make this thing work. And we have a receptive city. So it's a unique opportunity that we have here to actually get those ideas out. Know that you're not going to get laughed at like me and Andres were laughed at when we talked about kids using computers and doing stuff on CD-ROMs. So it's a different environment, but yeah, we still have some of the same issues we have to confront, because what happens structurally in all of this and historically is what's called differential development. You can't develop everywhere all at once because you really do have a limited amount of capital. Even if you're spending billions, you're spending those billions in a certain targeted place, and then somewhere else, you don't have that level of development. So we're trying to really wrestle with something that's not as simple as one would assume, but it does begin as far as a platform with all of us really starting to come together and talk and think and get those ideas out there. And it's going to have to be cross-generational. That's why we've got Daniel on this panel. I want to give a shout out to Asia O'Brien. We knew we needed to have the millennials in here because it couldn't just be folks like myself who used to have a shock or silver hair talking about this stuff. But we've got to get all these ideas happening in this room.
So let me follow up on that real quick. So the idea of co-creating these goods, right, which is what the co-city model is that I've developed with colleagues, is really what we need to be talking about. And technology, I think there's been an upside to technology in terms of equity and equality. So I don't think it's all about the digital divide, right? So platforms and technology help to connect us and bring people from the margins, right, into the economic mainstream. And all you have to do is think about Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and the ability of people to take their everyday goods and to participate in a new economy, right, using these platforms. And it's the same thing when you're talking about at the community-based level, trying to create the right kind of internet and the Internet of Things that really serves the community and serves their aims. That technology actually is a powerful means to bring people together, to connect generations, to connect folks even in the community. So there is an upside to technology, and so when I say to what purpose are we putting this, right? If we're always mindful about how we're using it and to what purpose and who gets access, and to make sure that the right folks in a community who have been on the margins have access, then I think we really can do something that's transformative.
So I want to, I think in a moment we'll go to the audience, so get ready with questions. Do we have somebody with the microphone? Do we have questions now? Okay, we've got one back there. We can go.
That's a question too.
Then we'll go over here. Why don't we start over here and we'll come back. Okay.
Michael Elling with Information Velocity Partners. Universal service has been an issue on the table for over 100 years. If you go back to 1913 with Theodore Vail and AT&T and the Kingsbury Commitment, they promised universal service. They didn't deliver. What resulted was the Communications Act of '34 and the advent of the FCC. And we had 50 years of 50 years, yes. And then we broke up AT&T. We had competition, we had equal access, and we had this thing called the internet come along. Any of you who know universal service, it's taking from one and giving it to the other. There was a form of settlements. The internet has no settlements. So how do we achieve universal service without settlements? And this, of course, gets to net neutrality if you understand the question. A terminating settlement. The internet is a settlement-free model. There is no exchange between two parties in the transaction. Anybody want to address that?
I think that's a very telecommunications policy way of looking at it, because there's a lot of money that, a lot of transactions, a lot of money going back and forth. And I think, the question maybe is more, where are there areas of great disparity where we should think about ensuring that there's universality so that ultimately everybody benefits. I mean, and I don't know, does anybody want to speak to that or take multiple questions? Yeah, in the back over there.
I can kind of address that a little bit because I worked for AT&T at the time of the divestiture. And at the time of the divestiture, communications was described as pieces of information that are transcribed via voice from one party to another between households and geographic locations. Internet of Things despises away from geographic location, does not concern itself with geographic location at all, okay? Person can be anywhere, anytime, receive information, and the information types are variable. They are not only communication types, they're video types, they're content types, they're all sorts of different types that are now being able to be transcribed over a network to any location, anywhere, anytime. Very different model, very different model. And those types of communications all have value associated with it and pricing associated with it, whereas years before, that was not the case. But I come at this from a different perspective. I want to know what is the variable in your minds about how, I lost my train of thought for a moment trying to answer that last question. How individuals learn through this vehicle at this time. How do they learn and what do they apply to this institution going forward? If you think about that, that gets to a very different vantage point because you and I come at this from an adoption perspective. And these younger people come about this from a learning perspective where they know no difference. So please elaborate.
Daniel, maybe can you talk a little bit more about how influence, and relationships work on the internet from your perspective?
Yeah, I was thinking about it, right? Because we're talking a lot of technical jargon and all that sort of stuff, right? But literally, I can throw a party and get 300 people here, and we could just talk about one thing, and that will go such a long way than the people in this conference, right? So I think in terms of how we learn, it's how do we use influencers and how do we use different marketing tactics that are current to get messages out there. That's how people are learning. People are learning kind of similar to all of us. When we were in school, we were on the basketball court and we were talking about just different things of who we liked or what was cool, what sneakers or whatever, right? And it works exactly the same way, but just digitally, right? So I think when you think about from a government perspective, I've worked with certain government agencies as a consultant, and I had to go through so many loops in order to have an influencer campaign, right? Where the goal would have been much faster, and they would have achieved it if they had just listened to me, So I think in terms of learning, I think it's simply that, making sure that we use the tools that we already have that are free in order to get whatever messages out there. We don't have to overcomplicate it.
Maybe a general question that I'm hearing also from this discussion is, what is the importance of a place or where you are, or your community, your neighborhood, being actually together as people? What's the importance of that for the future of the internet? Is that important from your perspective that we actually be able to see one another, or is the internet just global and as long as you can transmit digitally between people, the relationship is there?
I think specificity, I can't talk today, is very important, right? So having people that look like me, to your point, I would have never known about Silicon Harlem if Tyus didn't tell me, right? So I think that's really important. So really reach out when we talk about community organization, really understand what people's skill sets are, like how can they really be valuable to you, and then I would only listen, like because Taisha, for example, told me about this, and I trust Taisha just from a different perspective. I came here, and now I'm meeting everyone on this panel and all of you guys, and we're having really important conversations, right? So if we really break that down into its simplest form, making sure that we specify, because in America, we are very cliquey. We hang out with our people. From a race perspective, from an educational perspective, all that. This is how we work, right? So making sure that the systems that exist, that's how we make sure messages gets permeated. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
does anybody else want to weigh in? Or?
Got a question from
Hey, question is, so Anarua, you mentioned how there's a pain point for industry and that there's not the workforce that's needed to actually build out all these networks that we now need for the kind of technology we're starting to use. So, given that, there's sort of disinvestment in public education and we see schools really struggling to, meet the needs of educating people for tech, whose job is it to make sure that we have the workforce to make this happen? This isn't a question specifically for you. It's for everybody, given that there's a mismatch between how education is being carried out in communities and the needs of industry. So I'm just curious what you all see as being the answer to that.
Yeah, so Anna, maybe Anna, do you want to go first on that? Or?
Yeah, let's talk about it. It's simple economics. It's structural unemployment, right? So it's the skill set not meeting the actual job qualifiers and the needs of industry. It's the responsibility of the community. It's the responsibility of the school. It's also the responsibility of industry to train and nurture and build that skill set. And I do believe that, there's internship programs, there's funding that's, being made available. But I also think that it's the job of policymakers and educators to inculcate, kids with the right skill set. I do think it's a Department of Education and policy issue.
So here's where I think outside of the structures that we've had historically that, and in particular in cities where everything is kind of siloed, but in society. So education does this, industry does this, the community does this. Actually, what we're seeing now, and aided again by technology, is that we need to form partnerships, right, to do this. That industry needs to connect with community-based organizations and anchor institutions like Silicon Harlem, aided and facilitated by the city, and social innovators to actually come together and make sure folks are trained, that we've solved the structural deficit that we have in unemployment. And that is, I think, where the future lies in terms of bringing technology together with workforce development and just thinking outside the box a little, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah, Sheila, that's a great point, but let's think about, technology, right? So I'll give you an example. When I was working in the governor's office and we were doing the program, one of the things that, through our legacy projects, we were able to connect a town of 300 people in Delaware County that can only be accessed by a road through Greene County. Okay, and it's called Hawkett, and it's spelled Halkett. And there is the one remaining milk farmer in Delaware County. And Chris and his wife were able to have their daughter graduate from college. She then came home to become the kindergarten teacher And then she was able to get her master's online because of the technology that we were able to deploy in this very small and rural community. So that's innovation.
Yeah.
That's government working right. And that's what we're
With
really
industry.
right with industry, and that's what we're talking about.
And community.
Build the network, service the community, and enhance the quality of life. That's really what this is, right?
And then from my perspective, I'm looking at it from like an activism perspective, right? So like I was witness to an interesting conversation. This is totally not about this. So this guy was talking about Beyonce and she being a part of the Illuminati, and the 10 people around her was like, oh my God, wow. And so he created that truth, right? And he said that's why her album didn't do well and blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, hey, can I interject? Actually, her album was #2, and everyone was like, huh. And then not everyone believed me, right? So I think when you look at socially how we interact and how we learn and how we trust and, like all of those different things, I think it's my responsibility in my community to make sure I make enough noise, because if enough people talk about it and are angry about something, that's when government is going to react. So I think I look at it from that perspective.
Bruce, you want to add to that? I mean, I would just say, if you heard Albie talk earlier, he talked about the work we do with the libraries. I think trust is a really important aspect, and the libraries are a great partner for that.
I know we have to wrap up, and there's been a number of really important points made both by my co-panelists and people in the audience, and so I just want to ask everyone, hold on to your ideas. Let's keep this conversation going. Part of what you'll see happening over the course of the day is we have these short panels, and the ideas are enough that we could basically pursue them for half a day discussion, especially with whom we have here. And so I don't think we're going to come to any answers today, but I think we certainly have put forth the kinds of questions that will motivate us to continue to move forward together as we're trying to find these solutions. And of course, solution making is a process.
I don't know, how are we on time?
We're out of time.
It's time to wrap up.
Okay, well,
We got to go into lunch.
okay. Do we want to leave it there? Anybody else want to add any last points? I'll just, restate what I've said many times before about just how appreciative I am personally that Silicon Harlem is here. For other neighborhoods don't have this type of convening power, don't have this type of vision. Other cities don't have that. And we're just incredibly fortunate to have this opportunity to come together. And I just want to thank you all again for the work that you're doing when you're not on this panel, and for what you contribute in terms of rethinking the internet from all these different perspectives. Let's give a round of applause to our panel.
I need someone to find Clayton Banks and bring him to the stage. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this amazing panel. My name is Nye Whitaker. I'm the Women's Vote Director for the New York State Democratic Committee. I'm actually here because sadly our public advocate, Letitia James, couldn't join us today, but she sent a special gift that I just literally was here at the conference with everyone, went to pick up and came back. I've been a longtime member of the Silicon Harlem family, but I hope that someone can find Clayton because I'd like him to be here for this. So I'm gonna ask you to hold this mic for 1 second. It's unlike Clayton not to be near the mic, but I'm going to start this. So this proclamation from the Office